Bible study. This week we are talking about David. Now, we have been through Abraham, we have talked about Moses, we have talked about not Joshua, we've talked about Joseph, Ruth, and today we're talking about David. So we want to give you as much knowledge, which is this is going to be really quick because that's not much. We're going to give you as much as we can in about 15 minutes or less. So, Pastor Adam, why don't you start us off? We're here with Pastor Justin, Pastor Adam, Pastor Ryan. If you don't know us, come to church sometime when there's not a virus. We would love to see you. Love to see anybody right now. Start us off, and where we're going tonight with David.
It's kind of unfair to talk about David in this way because David is such a big central character in the Bible, and we're going to give him a very small amount of time. So we're going to kind of look at David, break him up into three parts: his early years, his middle years, and then his later years, and kind of just pick out one story from each area and see what we can learn from that and see how it really applies to our life. I think David is very applicable to us and how we can live it out in our day-to-day lives. Make sense? I said words wrong through all that. But
that's okay. That's all right. We're going. So start us off. You want me to read it?
Yeah.
Let me read it. We're going to 1 Samuel chapter 17, starting in verse 34. And I'm reading in the ESV version. So it says, "But David said to Saul, 'Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, but when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by the beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God.'"
You know, what I like about this verse and like about David here is this is David before he becomes King David, before he really is anything important, and he's doing the little things that make a big difference. You know, and for me, I look at this passage and look at what happens in these verses, and not all shepherds went after someone else's flock. David's talking to Saul here, and we see, and who's Saul at the time for them?
Saul's king. He's king of it. He is the first king of Israel, because we talked about Ruth last week, and in the story of Ruth, they're still in the time of the judges. And so Ruth is this transition point from the time of judges to the age of kings, and so Saul is the first king of Israel.
So we see David here as as a servant of Saul, and he's doing a menial task. He's doing something that is not really in the courts of Saul, that really wouldn't get recognition, but he's doing the things that they keep the sheep alive, that keep important, and it prepares Saul for something. Prepares David for something great. I know Pastor Justin talked about this yesterday for youth.
Yeah, what we talked about last night, it was just kind of ironic. This is what the David was what we talked about tonight. But last night I shared with my students is that when we talked about David killing bears and lions, that it was actually prepping him and giving him almost like a foreshadowing what he was to face. And we think a bear and a tiger, and we're like, oh wow, that's crazy. But then you think about what it prepared him to do, not only as he slayed Goliath, but as we'll go on later on, the different tasks and things that he would have to face. Even though he was a man after God's own heart, we'll find out that he still had a lot of flaws, but those things that he prepared for in the very beginning set him up for that later on down in Scripture.
Yeah, he had a lot of flaws. David is a flawed character, and although he's greatly celebrated, you can't pass over that fact. I think we do have to recognize that he's a lot like a lot of people we know. They have issues, they have trouble with things, and so David's got a lot of that.
You know, I think for this and for David's early years, what helps me here is this. I mean, there's so many times that I've been waiting for the right moment or right position to put the work in. Where I'm like, if I had this, then I'll do this. Or if this happened, then I can do this. And we see the difference with David. David's not doing that. David's saying, I'm going to do the right thing now. I'm going to put the work in now because it's going to benefit me in the future. And I think it's the stuff that's being done in the unseen that is always going to benefit you when everyone's watching. You know, as pastors, I wish we could give you our history. I said this in a devotional last week. our personal history with God is our personal history, and we can't pass it along to you. But that's the stuff that makes the difference. It's your personal time. It's the training. It's the stuff that no one sees. That when storms happen and when things happen, when you are facing giants, you are prepared. If David wasn't throwing rocks and trying to kill bears and lions to protect the sheep, he would have never been able to face Goliath or knew what to do. And for so many times in our lives, we are unprepared. We don't pray like we should. We don't read like we should. We don't do like we should. And when storms come, we have no weapon or no way to fight the enemy. So I look at this story here, and I love that. I love the fact that David is preparing when no one's watching. He's doing things that no one would know.
It's the small moments. It's those small moments. And actually, small moments can either prepare you for great things. Small moments can also, if you don't do well with them, I think it's kind of the flip side of that coin, the small things that we don't do well with. We say, oh, this doesn't matter. There's little crevices. You look at Song of Solomon, it's got a verse in there that says, catch for us the little foxes. It's the little foxes that spoil the vine. So small moments can come out in very big ways later on in life, for positive or negative. And I think for David, we see here, these were things that he let propel him to greatness. I remember as a youth pastor, things that that prepared me, just stacking chairs and putting tables up, and things that nobody saw, but that was just part of the daily ritual, the routine of getting ready to do service and knowing everything that went into it beforehand. It's not just standing up on the stage. It's not just talking to people. It's the fact that there's a lot that goes into it beforehand. So it's the little things.
Right.
Also with the preparing, as he prepared before he faced the giant, when he went to go and gather the stones as he faced Goliath, it says he grabbed 5 smooth stones. I've heard people say, if he had faith in God, why did he have 5 stones? Was he afraid he was going to miss? Was he afraid that he was, not going to kill him on the first shot? But I think it was him being prepared, because Scripture tells us that Goliath, I think, had 4 brothers. So one takes Goliath, he's got 4 more to take out the brothers just in case they come after him. So I think him preparing at a smaller scale helped him be able to prepare on a larger scale right at the time that he was facing Goliath.
Just make sure you got a big bag of rocks, right?
Yeah.
If they got a lot of brothers, carry a big bag of rocks. So, all right, let's move on. Let's go to our next verse. Can we go there?
Yeah, we're going to fast forward a lot in David's life here, and we're going to go to 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1. It says this: in the spring of the year, the time when the kings were out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all of Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rahab. You want
Rabbah?
Yep, Rahab.
Oh,
Just read it quickly. Rahab.
real quickly, yeah.
But this is the key part. But David remained in Jerusalem. And we're fast forwarding here. David now is king. Saul is not king anymore. And that's a whole history. That's a whole story in itself that we're kind of skipping over here. But we look at this verse and we look at David, and it says, when the kings were out at war, and we see David not there. He's home in Jerusalem.
Once again, it's a 5-word verse that plays in hugely to what David's not doing what he's supposed to be doing.
Right.
He's not fulfilling his purpose. He's kind of got lax, right? So where do we go from this? What do we see happen?
I mean, I think this is kind of where David is actually a broken hero. This is his first real brokenness, his first real big sin, where he goes out, and in the story goes out, he goes out and he sees Bathsheba, and he calls Bathsheba back, and they end up having a baby together. And then he goes and tries to get Bathsheba's husband to come back, and he ends up having to kill Bathsheba's husband. And it's one sin after the other, and it's one fall after the other. It's kind of the rolling down the hill snowball effect, where he just starts to happen in his life.
Laxness led to lust, which in turn it rolled into adultery, which rolled into murder, which rolled into lying, and
It's just like a Netflix series.
It does sound like a Netflix series. I think there's a Netflix series on the life of David. But yeah, I mean, the Bible's not pretty. It is. These are the ugly parts. But I think we need to see the ugly parts, because our lives are ugly like this too. in the sense that we need to make sure that, once again, the small things, what are we doing? Well, what does that small act lead to the next larger act?
I think that's why it's here. That's why we're talking about today. Because David gets lazy in what he's doing. The day-to-day small things that keep him ahead of everyone, to keep him the king, that keeps him on point. David stops doing that. Man, and life gets busy. Life gets very complicated sometimes, and we can stop doing things. There's been times in my life where I'm like, I'm so tired, I'm not going to read today, I'm not going to pray today, I'm not going to do this today. Then one day can turn into 2 days, and 2 days can turn into a week, and then before I know it, especially as a youth, before I knew it, I didn't pray for a month, I didn't read for a month, and I found myself just slipping away, not by choice, but just accidentally falling away. And I think we all do that from time to time, where we don't mean to do bad, we don't mean to do wrong, but we just find ourselves in situations because of our laziness or because we're not paying attention anymore, and we're outside of where we used to be, and we just don't know how to get back.
I think about what Jesus said in the New Testament when you go to the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus, he kind of took things to another level, and you would hear him say things like, "You have heard it said before, but I say to you." And what he's doing, he's like, well, you've heard it said, you can do this, and there's things that, technically, I guess you could try to get away with it, and we find the loopholes, we try to justify things. We try to justify the little things. I try to justify, not going to the gym here and there, or little things in my life that later on I'm like, I've not been in 2 months, and it's like, what happened? But Jesus, he takes that kind of, I'm telling you, don't commit murder, but don't hate anybody in your heart. It starts somewhere. These things start, and then they have a process of growth.
Yeah. I think of a lot of times, in the Bible, and especially with, raising kids and how we train them up. And, sometimes with my kids, they don't realize the small things lead to big problems. I remember one time Eli and Harper didn't pick up the blocks in the living room, and we left it, and then the next day they were running outside, and Eli tripped over the blocks and rolled his ankle, and he's crying, and we're like, yeah, if you would just listened yesterday and picked up what you did, you wouldn't have a problem today. And so many of us, that happens, and sometimes, unfortunately, that happens on big scales, like David, where you're talking about adultery, you're talking about murder. But for all of us, that sometimes happens on small scales, like Ryan said, if it's eating right or going to the gym, that all happens. But it comes when our focus just shifts a little bit.
Well, what do? A lot of times we want to blame the devil. The devil made me do it. It was after me. Just no, man. You did this. You didn't take care of something in your life, and now you're in this situation. Why did God do this to me? No. You did this, which this decision that you made precipitated another decision in your life, and so these things are connected. These things are definitely chained together.
It's definitely easier to blame somebody else instead of taking responsibility
Well, and we see
for your
that
own issues.
David does that with
absolutely.
Nathan later.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in the I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to say we're getting close to time, and so 1 Kings 2, 1 through 3. You want to read that for us?
Sure. When David's time to die drew near, he commanded Solomon his son, saying, I am about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting here that David is giving Solomon some advice on where to go. And David was already given instruction by God in the book of Deuteronomy that all the kings were. There was actually stipulations before Israel even had a king. They were given stipulations about things that they were not supposed to do. They weren't supposed to build up and flaunt their wealth. They weren't supposed to build up horses or great armies, war, and trust in that. They weren't supposed to take many wives, and we see all these things that became the downfall. David did a lot of that stuff, and then Solomon wound up doing some of the same stuff, and so he kind of gets passed along.
What I like about this in the scripture is that David recognizes a lot of his mistakes here. And on his deathbed, he's talking to his son, and he's just trying to remind him, don't do what I did. Don't do these mistakes. And it reminds me of, man, every day my kids pick up on the words I say. They pick up on the way I act and the way, stuff happens. And I want them to know the good. I want them to learn the godly stuff. And I don't want to be on my deathbed begging my kids to follow God. I want them to follow my life and see what I did. And David, he did a lot of bad things. And Solomon maybe didn't always have the greatest example of what a dad would be, but David is begging his son to follow God. And it just pressures me to be vigilant in my day-to-day walk, to follow God and let my kids just see my walk instead of just hear my words.
I think it's the thing, where David it's not, for a while there, he did try to hide it, but then once that's out there, he's just like, hey, God, clean me from the inside out and wash me, wash me with soap and make me clean. And so, I think that's kind of really what he's wanting to pass along to Solomon. And Solomon, he's seen it. He knows the stories. He knew where he came from. Hey, Solomon, you may not be perfect, but walk in the ways of the Lord, walk in the laws of the Lord, walk in the statutes of God. So I think that about wraps it up for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Next week, we're going to be looking at Holy Week. And so we're getting in here on Easter. And so we're going to be taking just a short break from our Broken Heroes Bible study. But next week, we're still going to have Bible study, but it's going to be kind of focused on Holy Week. And you're going to see some videos next week from these guys, just devotionals, just based on that. And so we're looking forward to that. We love Holy Week because, the passion of Christ just leads up to the resurrection of Christ. And we want to celebrate that, not just on Easter, but every day. So thank you for being with us. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Also, if you will, don't forget to join us 8 p.m. for our live wing challenge tonight. It's going to be fun. We're crazy, but we're going to have a good time with it. So
There you wings.
Yeah.
So check in.
Thank you. Y'all good night.